What's up, YouTube? In this video, we're going to talk about some of the major concepts in Malifaux, and specifically we're going to be talking about the Fate deck and something we call Duels. Okay, so the Fate deck is what you use in Malifaux essentially in lieu of dice. So this is your random number generator, but it does much more than that. It doesn't just generate the numbers to determine whether or not an action succeeds or fails, but it also has suits like a deck of cards, right? So this is essentially a 54 deck of cards, so 2 jokers included, and you can see there are values for each card, 1 through 13, which would correspond with ace all the way up to kings, and then you have a couple of jokers enclosed. Okay, so this is a much older Malifaux deck, by the way. So there's 2 jokers enclosed, and a lot of glare down there. So there is a black joker, and then there is also I think I passed it, but there's also a red joker. There it is. Okay, so I'm gonna so you can actually use a standard deck of playing cards in Malifaux. You would just need to translate the suits. But in order to help demonstrate that, I'm going to use this retro Fate deck, which is one of my favorites. You can see it looks remarkably similar to a standard pack of playing cards, except you can see there's just a slight modification on the design here for the clubs, for example. So again, 4 suits, and then ace through king, which is a 13. So you can see the ace there and the king. And then obviously 2 jokers in the game. Okay, so one thing to note about the jokers, there's the black joker. That's much better for anti-glare. And we'll flip through and find the red joker here. Oh, did I just not red joker myself? No wonder I'm not doing well in my games. No, there's one in here. Wow. Where is this guy? There it is. Okay. See? All right. So the things to note about the Joker, the 2 jokers is the red joker is the best deck card in the deck. It's a value of 14, any suit, and it gives an additional bonus when flipped for damage. The black joker is the absolute worst card in the deck, so value 0, no suit, can never be cheated, and you even have to take it on a flip where you have flipped both jokers. The black joker will override the red joker, and basically the black joker is the worst thing that can happen to you. Okay, so that's the basic. So those 2 are also in the deck, and you have 4 suits in the deck. Okay, so you have tomes, you have crows, you have rams, and you have masks. And the suits are what are typically used to determine triggers and the availability of triggers. And we'll get into that as well. Okay, so the deck is really the main thing that you're going to use in Malifaux to help determine outcome of specific actions, skill checks, even initiative, and the scenario and encounter itself, the strategies, the schemes, and even the deployment. That is all determined by your Fate deck. So anything really that requires some sort of random generation is determined by your deck. And in order to perform the action of determining what that is going to be, you perform what is called a flip. Okay, and so a flip is just simply that. It's just taking the top card from your deck and flipping it over, leaving it face up. And then you can see here I flipped a 9 of ramps. Okay, so you perform flips to attempt to meet certain criteria, and typically this flip is called a duel. Now, duels are, again, this is sort of the typical exchange that happens in Malifaux. And there are two major types of duels, okay? There are simple duels, and then there are opposed duels, okay? So a simple duel is really just where, typically only where one player is flipping, performing a flip, adding the relevant stat to that flip, and then determining if that total, including suit sometimes, because there's some suit condition, meets the requirement of that simple duel. This could be things like tactical actions. This could also be checks like for terrifying. There are also things like shockwaves that will produce a simple duel check. Okay, and again, this is very simple. You have to, let's say if I was going to perform an action and I had a stat of 5 and I needed a target and I had a target number of 10, then I would need to flip a value of 5 or higher. So I'd flip a card, that's an 11. I meet that criteria for that simple duel. Now, like I said, suits also matter. So in some cases, the target number may be like, a 10 of masks. In this case, I happened to flip a mask. So I did actually meet the suit requirement for the duel. Or sometimes the target number is just a regular target number like 10, and then there may be a trigger associated with flipping a mask. So in this case, I would have succeeded with the basic check itself, and then I may have a trigger associated with my suit there. Now, there are ways to actually ensure that you get certain suits, and there are also ways to modify a flip, okay? So those are things like spending soul stones, and then there are going to be environmental modifiers that may affect your flip, okay? So for example, let's say I had to perform a duel, but I was at a negative, and you'll see it in your stat cards or in the rules. You'll see a little card, they outline a rectangular outline with a little negative in it, a negative to your duel. So anytime you don't see either a negative or a positive or anything like that, this is what's called a neutral duel. In other words, you're just flipping one card and looking at that value. Wow, I wish I could do this in a real game. Nice 13 masks there. And then you have the ability to cheat, okay? And when you cheat, it's basically you have a control hand. This is a hand that you keep from the other player that will allow you to, quote-unquote, cheat fate. And then you can replace the card that has been flipped. Let's say, even though these are both 13s, let's say I really needed a tome to declare a trigger or meet a target number, I would then cheat that in, and then this card replaces the entire card, okay? So it replaces it in value and in suit. So they don't get added together. It's just whenever you cheat, it's just going to replace that card straight up. So again, in a neutral or a positive situation, you are allowed to cheat cards. But let's say something environmental causes me to be facing a negative flip on my duel. So, instead of like a dice game where a penalty might be a change in the overall value of your dice or the number of dice that you roll, in Malifaux, it's the number of cards flipped, and then the difference between a positive and a negative flip is whether or not you can cheat and how many cards you flip. Okay, so if I were in a negative flip, what would happen is I would flip 2 cards, and I'd show them both, and I would have to take the lower value of the 2 cards. In this case, hey, I'm fine, but, I would have to take the lower card. And then, most importantly, I cannot cheat fate. I cannot cheat out of my hand if there was a negative modifier on this duel. If it were a positive duel, I would flip, again, you still flip 2 cards, but this time you can do 2 things. you can choose either card. Most of the time you're going to choose the higher value card. That was a terrible positive flip. You see how the negative flip was actually better than the positive flip. But importantly here, I can now cheat fate. So if I don't like that 3, I can say, okay, let's play a 9 of Crow here instead of that 3 Ram. Now there may even be situations where you are faced with a double negative or even a triple negative or a double positive, for example. And that's exactly how it sounds. So if I was facing a double negative flip, what I have to do is now flip 3 cards, and you show each one, and you see I have an 11 Tome and a 13 Ram here. Well, and this was a double negative flip, so I am stuck having to choose this Ace of Mask, and once again, I cannot cheat this flip. If it was a positive, so even though it seems like somewhat advantageous in that you're flipping more cards, remember in a negative situation, you are forced to take the lowest value card and you cannot cheat fate. You cannot use the resource in your hand to help achieve that particular. Okay, so now we're going to use, or I'm going to demonstrate the other major type of duel in Malifaux, which is called an opposed duel. And in an opposed duel, this is where both you and your opponent will be flipping cards, you'll be comparing values, and then we'll be comparing the difference in those values. Okay? So in an opposed duel, both players would flip as before, and let's pretend there's no negatives, no modifiers on either side here. So we're both going to be in a straight flip situation, or a neutral flip. So you can see this player here got an 11 mask, and player on my left here got a 3 of mask. Okay, so I'm gonna borrow a couple cards here for both players. Okay, so both players in this case would be flipping a card, and then they would be adding a specific stat. So in the case of an attack, there's usually a stat for the attacker, and then there is the RST, or what the defender resists with. Okay, so let's say for this example, there is a 5 stat to the cast, and there is a 4 stat to the resist, which is defense. Okay, so the attacking player, which is this player, would add 3 plus 5 to make a total of 8, and the defending player would use 11 plus their defense stat of 4 to make 15. So it's 8 to 15 in favor of the defender. Now, the player that is currently losing the duel, in other words, the player with the lower total, is given the first opportunity to cheat fate. So that player may look into their control hand, and you can see they have a 12 here, and they may want to play that, and let's play that 12 again. So I'm going to cheat fate, go to a 12 of Tome, and again, the suit may matter in terms of getting a trigger, and now the total is 12 Tome plus 5 stat, or 17 Tome, to the defender's 11 mask plus 4 defense, or 15 mask. So now the defender has that same opportunity to cheat fate, and they may look into their hand, and it's not a good day for the old school Malifaux player, and so they may choose to pass on this duel. Now, the difference in these totals, in the case of an attack that does damage, actually will affect the damage flip. Okay, so we're going to get into that a little bit more when we start talking about abilities and attacks. But for now, I wanted you to see just the difference between a simple duel and an opposed duel. So you can see in a simple duel, you're trying to hit a static target number. In an opposed duel, you're flipping your stat against an attacker's stat versus a defender's RST, or resist, and then adding the value and suit of the card to that specific characteristic, comparing those totals, and the difference of those totals will determine outcome. Okay, so just to reinforce the opposed duel again, I'm going to give you guys an example. So in this example, a showgirl is going to be performing this action, lure, against the defending Union miner there. So in this case, there is both an RST, or resist, and there's a target number. So this is a 12-inch range, that's RG. The stat, or what the attacker uses, is the value of 6 to their flip. The defender is going to RST, or resist, with their willpower, and the attacker needs to at least make this target number in order for the attack to be defended against. So in this case, the attacker would flip, and you can see that's an 11 of RAM. So 11 plus stat 6 is 17, so we do meet the target number there. But note, we currently do not have this tome here for the trigger beautiful close. So now the defender must resist with their willpower, and the Union miner's willpower is 5. We're going to ignore, and there's some things that the Union miner would have if they were close to another model that shared a trait with them. But anyway, let's go ahead and flip their card. So they flip a 2 tome, and so 2 plus 7, 2 plus 5 equals 7, 11 plus 6 equals 17. So it's 17 to 7 in favor of the attacking performer. So at this point, the defender is losing the duel. The defender gets the first opportunity to cheat fate. They'll look into their control hand and decide whether or not it's worth cheating fate. So in this example, the miner can decide, okay, I can cheat in this big old 13 here, which is a fantastic card. It would be awful to lose that out of my hand, but I got a decent control hand. That would put me at 18 to 16, and I would succeed. Now in this case, tying would not be good enough. So if I went 12 plus 5 to 17, that would tie the attacker's 17. The tie would go to the attacker, and we would still carry out the action. So really the decision here is, do I cheat in the 13 and make it not happen? And then it's up to the attacker. So let's say the player really wants to protect their Union miner, and they decide to cheat in this 13 mask, putting them now at 18 mask to 17 RAM for the attacker. Now, cheating fate goes back to the attacker. And the attacker can look in their control hand, and as you can see, they don't have the ability to beat that duel there. So they can now not get to 18 because they would need a 12 in order to get there. And you can see the control hand isn't there. So in this case, the action would fail. However, if the defender did not cheat, then the attack would succeed. So let's pretend that they opted not to cheat, because there's no point in cheating. And now in some cases, especially where damage is done, it may be worth to cheat a higher card in to help reduce the possibility of the attacker flipping high damage or cheating high damage in. We'll get into that when we start talking about specific attacks and that kind of stuff. But in this instance, it's either, beat the total or not. And let's say they decide not to, right? Now, that doesn't mean that this is just going to go on like that. The attacker now still has the opportunity to cheat fate. And let's say they wanted that trigger to happen, right? So I have a 10 tome here. I'm going to go ahead and cheat in the 10 tome, right? That still puts me at, that still meets the target number of 12 for the ability. It still beats the defender's total of 7. And so this whole thing would be carried out, plus we would be able to declare the trigger. So you would move the target towards this model, its move. So you would do something like that. And then you would declare the trigger, beautiful close, target gains distracted +1. So that's just to give you an example of an opposed duel. Again, this is one of the major concepts to understanding Malifaux, is your ability to perform duels and then specifically make those kinds of decisions that I demonstrated here. So that's going to be it for this portion. I want to thank everyone for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.